All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel titled From Funding to Foundries, How China Builds AI Power. I want to begin by thanking SCSP for supporting our work and also allowing us to serve as a special event partner for the third consecutive year at the AI Expo. My name is Fatima Khan, and I am a senior associate at the Institute for Security and Technology. I'm joined today by my wonderful colleague, Jennifer Tang, who is also a senior associate at IST. And over the next several minutes, we'd like to offer you the analytical frame for today's discussion and situate it within the research program that has shaped our thinking. So IST, or Institute for Security and Technology, is a nonpartisan critical action think tank working at the intersection of emerging technology and national security. The research that you will hear reflected in today's session draws on two of our initiatives in particular, namely the Strategic Balancing Initiative, which examines misalignments between U.S. public and private sectors in our technology competition with China, and the AI Chip Export Control Initiative, which Jen will speak to shortly. But I want to begin by naming a problem, and which is that public conversations about China or China's technology system tend to gravitate towards one of two poles. In one, China is cast as a perfectly coordinated state apparatus executing a master plan with unmatched efficiency. But in the other, it is dismissed as a subsidized edifice incapable of competing at the technological frontier. We at IST believe that both these framings are analytically inadequate, and both, in our view, lead to policy that is either reactive or complacent because it's based on caricature rather than deep-rooted understanding. For this reason, over several years, IST has been working to replace those narratives with something more precise and useful, which is an evidence-based account of how China's innovation ecosystem actually functions, where its genuine strengths lie, and where its structural constraints are most binding. And today's session is actually an opportunity for us to stress test that account with a distinguished group of panelists that will be with us very shortly. But my own entry point into the China ecosystem has been through capital. At IST, through the Strategic Balancing Initiative and through a recent study that we partner with SCSP on, we looked at where the U.S. deep tech financing system falls short compared to China's. We found that venture capital alone cannot scale hardware. The real bottleneck lies between working prototype and first factory, where timelines stretch, risk capital pulls back, and the US has no real equivalent to the patient coordinated capital that China provides by design. And that gap essentially is the heart of today's conversation. China's state capital system, the national IC fund, provincial guidance funds, policy banks, it's all built to bridge exactly that stage where we're lacking at the moment. It moves projects faster, it sets global prices, but it also wastes money and it sometimes fails. And it's a real strategy, and how that strategy actually works on the ground as a layered system rather than as a monolith as it's commonly misunderstood is what this panel will help us understand today. And with that, I'll turn to Jen for the hardware and policy dimensions and to talk a little bit more about some of the claims that we're challenging today.
Thanks, Fatima, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I want to pick up where Fatima left off and just introduce some of the other work that IST is doing in the chips and geopolitics space. So through IST's AI Chip Export Control Initiative, our team has been examining a key question. Are export controls functioning as intended? And if not, what does that reveal about some of the assumptions that are driving US strategy today? My colleague Gabby and I in the audience, and I built out a working group of policymakers, chip companies, tech associations, and many lawyers to look into where compliance is breaking down, where enforcement gaps are most critical, and how to think about more effective policy decision-making. And as I'm sure most of you know, it is a very, very easy problem to solve. We'll soon be stress testing some of these topics through tabletop exercises, both in DC and with a visit to the Bay Area. On the geopolitics in Asia front, IST has increasingly focused on the role of US relationships with key partners in the AI supply chain. So Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan are increasingly central not just for strategic stability in the region, but for semiconductor production, advanced packaging, economic security, and of course, geopolitical leverage. And that brings us to today's panel discussion. In Washington, nearly every conversation about technology and national security eventually converges on the issue of China. But too often, those conversations flatten China's AI ecosystem into something that's either monolithic or opaque. And what we hope to do today is unpack how China actually builds AI power, how state priorities, private firms, local governments, and their talent pipelines interact in practice. And to do that, our panelists will interrogate 4 claims that increasingly sit at the center of debates around Chinese technological power. So first, China's ecosystem is not centrally planned in the way that many assume, but instead operates through structured competition. As we'll soon hear from our panelists, Chinese AI companies and suppliers experience pretty fierce competition with one another, both at home and abroad. Second, China's comparative advantage may lie less in frontier innovation than in diffusion and system-level scaling and integration. Third, that US constraints, namely in export controls, are reshaping rather than halting Chinese AI development. And fourth, that the build-out of the full technology stack matters more than any single layer in isolation for China. And so taken together, these questions force us to think really seriously about the relationship between capital, compute, industrial policy, and strategic stability, both in China and here back at home. And the panelists we've invited today are incredibly well positioned to help us navigate those questions. And so with that, I'm going to turn it to Steve to introduce himself and our amazing panelists. Thank you.
Hello, all, and thank you for joining. Thank you to Jen. Come on up.
All right, cool.
Thank you to Jen and to Fatima for that great framer that puts us in a good stead to be able to kick off the conversation. I'm joined today by 4 wonderful panelists: Ryan Fedasiuk, a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute; Sam Sachs, senior fellow at Yale University's Paul Tsai China Center; Sunny Chung, fellow at the China Studies at the Jamestown Foundation; and Dr. Joost Vubecki, managing partner at Synalytics. I'm Steve Kelly. I lead IST's technology and strategic stability portfolio. And so this topic is front and center. We were just in Shanghai and Beijing a week and a half ago, engaging on these topics. And so I have some great perspectives, and I can't wait to hear what our experts have to say. So what we're going to do is start out with each of our panelists telling you a little bit more about themselves in the context of this topic, AI and China. And then I'll ask them to provide a very quick nugget, a foretaste of the conversation in terms of what is the most misunderstood feature of China's AI ecosystem. And so then we're going to be then moving through a number of key questions based on the premises that you saw up on the screen. And at the end, we'll be asking them for some recommendations going forward. So we'll start there. So Ryan, over to you for a little bit about yourself and something to whet the appetite.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, IST, SCSP, for hosting this event. And it's really a privilege to join a lot of people whose work I've admired and read for years. So I'm Ryan Fedasiuk. I'm a fellow at AEI. I'm also a professor at Georgetown in the Security Studies program. And before joining AEI, where I write about China and technology, I was at the State Department as a U.S. China bilateral affairs advisor dealing with tech policy and doing many of our conversations with the Chinese embassy in Washington. I think the thing that bothers me a lot in conversations about China is kind of this bifurcation. On the one hand, you've got people who think that China can do nothing right, that it's weak, it can't innovate, it has to steal every bit of technology from the West. I think this is an outmoded way of thinking about China, and it frustrates me to no end. But on the other side of the equation, I'm equally frustrated by people who are increasingly China-pilled, who think and recognize correctly that China's power has grown in recent years, but because of this, they think there's nothing the United States can do to stop its inexorable rise. This is equally untrue. There are many levers the United States can still pull to shape the arc of AI development in China, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about some of those today. Sam?
Thank you. A privilege to be here today. I want to double click on the opening comments by Jen and Fatima about a layered non-monolithic China. And I think oftentimes in the US, we refer to China as one thing. And just like in the US, there is actually robust debate and very different, oftentimes competing interests among the different stakeholders that are shaping China's AI and emerging technology ecosystem. I forgot to introduce myself. I've been a watcher and an analyst of China's technology development for going on 15 years. I started my career in the national security community as a Chinese linguist and analyst focused on counterintelligence and technology. Then I moved to the commercial space. I led the tech practice for China at Eurasia Group and later Siemens industrial cybersecurity business in Korea, Japan, and China. And now have been in a research scholar capacity where I have the ability and the luxury to look at these issues in ways that I hope can span both the commercial perspective as well as the national security perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sunny. Really a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for IST to host this very timely event to have this very important conversation moving forward. So a little bit about myself. So I'm now a fellow at the Jamestown Foundation, focusing on a lot of PLC emerging technologies such as AI, robotics, and then even like quantum, a little bit of everything. And at the same time, I'm also advising the Taiwanese national think tank, the Research Institute for Democracy, Society, and Emerging Technology, the DSET. So we have been studying a lot of regarding the Chinese, the Taiwanese supply chain and how they can work together and try to compete each other, try to gain the upper hand and try to supplement and complement the US supply chain and integrate with them. Also, regarding the question, so I think one thing that really frustrates me a lot regarding is how poorly people understand actually the technological ambition of China. People thought that actually Xi Jinping or the Chinese government just talk about the self-sufficiency because several years ago the US government imposed the export control. But if you look into the CCP grand strategy from the 80s after the reform and opening up, at that period of time, Deng Xiaoping already in 1986 launched the 863 program for the first time to talk about space, emerging tech, and also biotech, a lot of stuff for the Chinese to move forward and try to gain self-sufficiency. So we are dealing with a whole of nation society here, and we are happy to talk more about that later.
Thanks, Sonny.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I've been dealing with China for about 20 years. Most of the time was about human intelligence in a way, so AI is only a topic for the past few years, obviously. I'm representing a consulting company called Analytics. We are based in Berlin. Landed yesterday. We have also an office in Beijing and partners in DC. We advise companies on the technology, like technological progress in China, especially on AI, but also with regard to semiconductors and so on. So very happy to also share insights from the consulting practice. If you ask me what is the most misinterpreted or I would say underestimated topic of AI in China, then I would say it's definitely the topic of embodied AI. Why that? I think we are currently seeing a revolution in China, which is the next level of AI, and that is the AI that interacts with the physical world. It sounds very technical, but if you look at those, I have to say, silly robots dancing in the New Year's gala or running a half marathon, it would look funny, but in the end, there's a deeper technological revolution behind that. And that is, in my view, you have chips which are highly energy efficient and used for not data centers and AI, but the robots or for the edge devices. It's not only about robots, but also about, for example, smartphones running models on the device itself. Yeah? And I think that is something where China is quite doing things that you have seen it elsewhere, but maybe not to that degree. So happy also to talk about that.
Well, I think we absolutely should. I know that there's some demonstrations upstairs that are quite entertaining, but maybe nothing to the scale that is a pretty common presentation approach at major conferences in China. So I think there's a lot of room for the U.S. to move in that direction. We're actually going to start, Joost, back with you. Our first move here is around funding and industrial policy, and I'll return to the first claim that Jen and Fatima proposed, and I'll reread it because it's not on the screen, is that China's AI system is not centrally planned, but developed through structured competition. Joost, can you put a little more meat on that bone? What does it look like over there, and how does that differ from the U.S. approach? There's a lot to understand there.
I actually really like this term of structured competition because there's a misperception like everything in China is centrally planned and steered, and that's definitely not the case for the AI industry. There is certainly a certain level of state support, which is important and which is distorting the market as in other industries. I would say most of the support is in the field of data center construction. You can see like hundreds of AI data centers popping up throughout the whole country. Most of those being super inefficient. But this is one level, and the other level is, of course, the support in the field of semiconductors when it comes to AI accelerators. That the Chinese government is trying to build domestic versions. We heard it about the export controls and so on. So that is the state support. Mm-hmm. However, and I think that is one big thing that we underestimate, not just for AI, I think throughout the whole Chinese economy, is a very high level of innovation happening, and that is one of the pillars China is so competitive. One pillar is industry policy, yes, but innovation is equally a pillar. Yeah? So I think when we talk about Chinese innovation in AI, these are small startups. Yes, often they are nurtured by government contracts and so on, like iFlyTech and one of the more traditional AI companies. But I think they also have innovative teams. They do not have to rely on government support. Mm-hmm. So I think that is one important aspect that we should keep in mind.
Okay. So Sunny, I'm going to come to you next. So we've seen in the new 5-year plan, there's a lot of focus on technology advancement, but that is not, the national priorities are not the only place where we see governments within China, driving for innovation and for economic growth. I know that there's things happening at the provincial level, creating incentives for startups. What do you think that is happening there, and how does the 5-year plan provide kind of the top level steer? But then, how does that trickle down, and what does the startup innovation economy there look like?
That's a great question. I think the two statements is not mutually exclusive in a way that the first statement is about. So China, they do have a central plan. They talk about, for example, embodied intelligence. In the new 5-year plan, they talk about physical AI all the time, and they talk about any other kind of emerging technologies all the time. But at the same time, on the other hand, the startup compete with each other. Because they compete with each other is not just because they want to comply with the state directive, but at the same time because they want to earn profits, right? So of course, they want to become the national champion, to arise from the competition and try to be the representative from a province. We have seen a lot of evidence from that. For example, when we talk about robotics, the Shanghai and Guangdong, and also the western parts of the Sichuan or Chongqing provinces, actually we have seen that they are competing with each other. And the reason for that is because they talk about humanoid robotics. The central government want to invest in humanoid robotics, but at the same time, the provinces wanted to win the competition and try to get as many stipends as they can, and at the same time trying to have their own national champions to represent China as a whole. So I think the two statements are not mutually exclusive in this way.
That's interesting that the term you used, the national champions. So the ecosystem by which a startup then can rise to the level of an organization that is now kind of a national priority or kind of the pride of the country. I know we have major tech companies here in the United States that started in garages, and we don't really use the term national champion. That does sound like something that's unique there. I don't know whether Samm or Ryan, if you want to kind of jump on this theme as to how the system works, and at what point a company rises to the level that it's being recognized by the party more broadly, and that they become very, very important, and perhaps even, I don't know whether the too big to fail thing ever comes up in that context, but
I would defer to Samm as knowing more about the Chinese ecosystem and the rise of national champions in different tech industries. But I'll just say I think that one interesting dynamic I've observed in the Chinese AI space is the kind of patriotic specialization of certain labs. Similar to a dynamic that exists, I think, in the United States and in other countries, there's a way that an institution, a for-profit corporation, can align itself with the interests of the state in a bid to secure greater and greater government contracts. And this is exactly the play of one lab in particular in China, Zhipu, now branded as ZAI, which has produced some pretty stunning models in recent months, backed in large part by million and billion-dollar contracts being awarded by certain elements of the Chinese government. And so this is the play of one particular actor in this, frankly, huge and highly competitive ecosystem that is building a large number of small AI models in China. Anything you want to add?
I think there's an interesting mirroring if we think about the concept of, now the term is military-civil fusion, but 20 years ago when I began looking at it, it was civil-military integration, and this was a concept that the Chinese defense industrial-based companies learned from the U.S. And in fact, there's been a lot of discussion in China about the silos that have made it very difficult to do that. And in the US, I think we increasingly have military-civil fusion. And so there's an interesting mirroring between the two, as well as demonstrations of patriotism and the revolving door between the two. I will say that there are a number of different players when I think about the Chinese AI ecosystem. You have the hyperscalers, the Baidu, Alibaba, Tencents, that have state backing and in many ways have been deemed part of the national team that Ryan mentioned, and they're really leading at the infrastructure layer. You have the venture-backed startups and the Minimaxes and the Zhipus. And this is really, I think, what's most equivalent to a frontier AI lab in the US. Then you have the state-affiliated labs, which despite a lot of the attention on how the state is leading in AI, I'd say the state-affiliated labs are significant players, but are not near as sort of innovative as some of the more private-focused players. And then what I'm really interested in are the hybrids, right? There are a number, and I would put Huawei and DeepSeek actually in this category, that don't fit cleanly into any of them. And in some ways, they span multiple ones, and that's created challenges and controversy within China's AI ecosystem. So Huawei has the complete stack from the infrastructure to the AI applications, and increasingly using its operating system as the vehicle to deliver Chinese AI, Harmony, across a whole system of connected devices, from not just the smartphone, but also the wearables and the IoT and the cars. And then DeepSeek, of course, is interesting because its revenue is primarily back from a hedge fund. And then in ByteDance, for example, now is pushing forward with an agentic AI model embedded in the operating system of the phone. So it's a really complicated ecosystem of different stakeholders and fiercely competitive.
Okay. The term I think you used, Ryan, was patriotic specialization. I'm going to remember that one because maybe we'll end up coming back to that. And I'm curious as to, and I'll ask this rhetorically, and we can get to it maybe in a future move, as to whether the motivation for patriotic specialization is kind of a government signal through some means. Maybe it's through a major contract, but that's an interesting idea. We're actually going to move on to the next topic of AI diffusion. And Samm, we're going to come right back to you, and I think you already started taking us down that path a little bit. Claim number 2 was that China's strength is not in frontier innovation, but system-level scaling. When we were in country recently, we heard a lot. In fact, it was a standard talking point about how they are focused on kind of deploying and making best use of AI in every and all aspects of the economy. And so, and not a lot of interest in talking about frontier AI and kind of a race to AGI and ASI. Instead, it was more about kind of the everyday uses and how they can squeeze efficiency out of their economy, which is it's quite compelling. So can you kind of lead us off on, Samm, a discussion around diffusion and adoption? Is China optimizing for frontier breakthroughs, or I think I sort of previewed the answer, or rapid diffusion and application? And then what are the kinds of firms? Who's driving that?
Yeah. China has a revealed preference, I think, on the diffusion side. When you talk with Chinese engineers, when you talk with the entrepreneurs, there's very much an emphasis on pragmatism. How can we embed AI in existing sectors of the economy and make it useful to people? And if you look at the language of, I think, understanding China, you have to both look top down and bottom up. A lot of people in Washington spend all their time at the state level plan. Well, the Chinese party declared they want to do this, and it must be so. The reality is it's oftentimes hard to implement those plans. But if we look at it, because that is an important signaling mechanism, you know, the AI Plus initiative is very much about how can we use AI not just as a technology, but as an economic tool. Right. And you see this, and I think you saw it, whether it's manufacturing, logistics, healthcare, education. But there also really is an emphasis on the frontier capabilities as well, and particularly at some of the state-affiliated labs, whether it's the Beijing Academy of AI or the Tsinghua affiliated groups, they are increasingly looking at AGI. And people have told me recently in China, this is the year of AGI in China. So I really think in some ways it's a sort of both and, but you will see that diffusion and deployment very much has been a strength that they've leaned into.
So is it your experience that they are pushing towards the frontier to AGI, but that's less of something that they want to talk about publicly? So are you hearing that in private conversations, or do you see that kind of end up in kind of public talking points as well? Because we have seen companies like Alibaba and others giving, and superintelligence is up on a big banner behind them, but when talking to certain officials, it doesn't seem to be the emphasis point.
I think it's not a secret, I think that it just depends on who you're talking to. And this is, again, that answer of China's layered, and it's not just one thing. So I'll hear both publicly and privately.
Very good. Actually, Sunny, I'll come to you for some perspective, because you've got a lot of on-the-ground experience there. Thoughts?
I would say that, the Chinese is definitely, as Sam mentioned, the AI Plus initiative talk more regarding the application scenario. This is something that we haven't seen actually from the USG or actually any Western government. You see the Chinese, how many physical AI they have been deploying, the IoT thing they have been discussing. Just previously, Sam mentioned about the Harmony OS, which is a software system, OS system that developed by Huawei and now becoming open source, and trying to use that not just on the Huawei phone, but try to connect them also to electronic vehicles, even satellites. So this kind of system, you can see that they do want to diffuse that and proliferate that as soon as possible. I think this is one of the key difference we have seen comparing the China and the US model. And at the same time, we will also talk about, actually, when you talk about AGI, I do feel like, in China right now, even though they will also talk about AGI, but at the same time, they will see AGI as something about deployment, something about that can really de facto impacting people and citizens' daily life, rather than having some very futuristic imagination, having a future, humanoid Terminator to come up and try to take over the world, right? So when they talk about AGI, they feel like, okay, if I can get AI to be embedded and integrated into our daily life, and this is the ultimate status and form that we really want to live in. So I feel like the vision they provide, the vision they anticipate, really is quite different compared to American.
So in terms of the companies that are acting within this space in China, we talked a lot about it earlier. The startups, your national champions, party-affiliated labs, universities. I don't know if we've seen it yet, but how resilient is their AI ecosystem to firm-level shocks? And are there companies that as in the U.S. startup industry, some small percentage, make their way to a successful exit. And I presume the same exists there. Things start up and are tried and fail. And then there's others that reach a particular maturity, and it would hurt a lot, if they went away. Is it a similar system there, and how resilient are they to things that would happen in the marketplace that might put some of those companies at risk?
No, I think there's a lot of redundancy in China's AI ecosystem, and we saw this on display, for example, with the Manus debacle. The disappearance of Manus from China domestically initially led to zero visible disruption. There's the factor of open weights that are released publicly. It provides a lot of opportunities for diffusion. And so the state is not relying on one single entity or a small handfuls of entities. This is where the layered approach, I think, has benefit in building in that redundancy, which stands in contrast, I think, to the US, where you're increasingly seeing a very small number of companies really concentrating where that strategic capability is.
Interesting. Before we move on to our next theme area, I did want to open it up. Ryan or Yost, if you had anything you wanted to add. Don't need to, but if you have a thought.
Yeah, sure. Lots of thoughts. So I think it's super interesting to hear this conversation. I think there's a technological dimension, there's an economic dimension, but there's also a social dimension. And I think for China, it's very important to have these independent models, because for China, it's also about who is controlling the narrative. We have seen this in the past with like Google and search engines, so now we have the same logic again. There was a paper by a Chinese standardization organization like 2 years ago, and they quite openly talked about this topic of worldviews and models. So their basic assumption is an AI also carries a certain worldview. So if we just adopt US models, of course, from their perspective, it would undermine their socialist narrative. So from that view, controlling the narrative, it's also very important to have Chinese models. And that's also, the fact that, we have hundreds of Chinese models, but to go public, to be published, they have to go through a certification or through a approval mechanism. And I think that is something that we should not underestimate. It's so important for China. And recently there's also a lot of discussion about AI safety in China, not just from an ideological point of view, also from the view of, let's not do something wrong and AI should be ethical and so on, but it also includes a certain worry that when training the AI models, they're kind of contamined or poisoned by unintended worldviews. So I think that is one challenge, and the other challenge, we can also talk about that later, the hardware challenge. It is a challenge, so, but I think it's definitely something that we also should keep an eye on.
Yeah, the point that you made is a really good one. It's not really on our kind of roadmap for this conversation to go further down the path, but that the idea that the model is a product of the data it was trained on, and there are some societal alignment issues that they need to have in place, and especially as we think about how U.S. technology or Western technology proliferates throughout the world, including the global South, and China through the Belt and Road Initiative is as well, making their technology available. How it's oriented according to the data it was trained on and how it was fine-tuned matters a lot, and that worldview is being brought into products worldwide. I don't know, Ryan.
I would just add briefly, I think this is exactly right. And one thing, just to close kind of with a wishy-washy, hand-wavy way of viewing AI, is one helpful way of thinking about AI, I think, is that it is both a capability and a commodity. And at the policy level, where I spend a lot of my time trying to pay attention to what the US and the Chinese governments are doing to promote AI's development, I think it's helpful to realize that really both governments, both the Trump administration and the Chinese Communist Party, have viewed AI as a relatively normal technology, as a commodity to be bought and sold in third markets and harnessed for national economic and military power. And so they're paying a lot of attention to adoption, and less emphasis at the policy level has been placed on unlocking frontier capabilities, at least under the Trump administration. I do think that's starting to change. Just in this spring of 2026, with anecdotal evidence from the United States and from China, 4 weeks after the launch of Claude Mythos, I think both governments are just starting to awaken from this slumber to understand that AI could pose new, perhaps some kind of fantastical capability that was previously difficult to forecast or to imagine the use of. And so I'll be watching closely how policies in both governments end up shaking out to adjust to that reality.
Mm-hmm. That's a perfect place to kind of transition to our next theme on compute, chips, and constraints, and Jen and Fatima's third claim. U.S. imposed constraints are reshaping, but not stopping, China's AI development. Interesting on that, I think that the Mythos moment certainly is something that has captivated the imagination. Certainly, a first use case for these capabilities is going to be cyber. I think we will see, and that's widely predicted. Something that IST, our organization, has been focused on. We did a report recently, I'll plug our work while I'm at it, on AI loss of control, and came up with an indications and warning framework and a severity schema for that. So that's something that as the frontier is making progress, these are the kinds of things that we now have to grapple with, and the U.S. regimes, and that this is something that came up in every single meeting, is complaints around unfair. They're looking for fair competition, and things like export controls and entity list designations and the like are things that the Chinese are not real happy about. So let's talk about that, and Brian, we're going to come to you. Are U.S. export controls really slowing their progress, and is there evidence to support and contest this? Because, boy, they're making a whole lot of progress, and even though the H200 is made available for sale now, I don't think they've actually picked up on that.
Interesting. Good question. It's an open question. I'm going to try to keep my comments short, but this is an...
You could give a whole speech on just this.
It's a topic that really excites me, so you got to forgive me. And just kind of some personal background, I was in the Biden administration as a civil servant helping to formulate some of our initial restrictions on the sale of advanced semiconductors to China back in 2022. And so I'll try to be as unbiased and frank as I can be. I mean, to assess whether controls on compute have been effective in slowing China's AI, we have to just very quickly talk about what is compute for? What do you need a computer to do to build and run an AI system? Very basically, we're transforming electricity into tokens, and the efficiency with which you can do this is constrained by two variables. It's the speed with which you can transform electricity into tokens, which is a function of the number of transistors you can squeeze onto a logic die in a modern AI accelerator, and you need huge amounts of memory to store all the rules of the algorithm that we are using to process somebody's query. All of the trillions of parameters in a modern AI system that are being sifted through in order to produce an output. And so basically you need a really advanced logic chip, and you need huge amounts of high bandwidth memory made in South Korea. Physically, there is no other way to process an AI system. Now, to train an AI system requires a large amount of computational power. To train ChatGPT 4.0, for example, took about 25,000 of the most advanced AI accelerators that NVIDIA could produce at that time, about 25,000. To serve ChatGPT in 2026 to billions of people, at least 800 million people every month, depending on how you count it, probably more than 1 billion users a month, we need way, way more computers transforming electricity into tokens, way more computers than any individual company in the United States and China has ever previously installed, period. Okay, and so the theory of controlling the export of computational power to Chinese labs is that without sufficient access to computers, they couldn't build, and specifically, they could not run at scale AI services for hundreds of millions of people around the world. Broadly speaking, what I've just said to you about AI services is absolutely true. No lab in the United States or in China would tell you that they feel comfortable with the amount of computational power they've currently purchased. There simply isn't enough of it. I run AI services. I run a small startup on the side called Digital Embassy. I went to go buy a really advanced Mac last week, a Mac Studio. I literally could not because they are sold out of high bandwidth memory everywhere in the world. You cannot buy an advanced computer as a personal consumer today to run particularly large, mid to large size models locally. It is simply not possible. We are out of compute. And so Chinese labs are feeling these constraints. American labs are feeling these constraints. The fact is that China's accelerator ecosystem can produce a fraction of the compute that NVIDIA, TSMC, and South Korean memory manufacturers can make themselves. The flip side of this equation, the counter-argument to what I've just laid out to you, is that, well, China's chip champions are trying to build better chips, and China's AI labs are trying to build smaller models that can be run locally at the edge. The fact is that there are fewer and fewer amounts of high bandwidth memory to go around for people to run AI models at the edge, but it is true that Chinese chip champions are catching up and producing their own kinds of computational power today that previously were not. It is also true that Chinese AI labs have found ways to do more with less by building smaller models that can be run with less memory on outdated chip architectures in terms of logic die fabrication. And there are many, many technical pathways that I and my team at AEI are trying to pay attention to figure out how exactly China can overcome this chip bottleneck. But I think it is a mistake to say that controls failed. Controls on computational power are perhaps one of the greatest strategic assets that the United States today deploys against China to shape the arc of its AI industry. That said, it is undoubtedly true that China is catching up and moving the goalposts. Whereas previously, the chokehold technology was in semiconductor manufacturing equipment and the production of logic die, it is now in high bandwidth memory for all of the reasons that I'm talking about with you today, as well as advanced packaging of AI accelerator units, both of which are severely constrained in China, as the ecosystem in China can make only about 2% of the standardized amount of compute for, that is the amount of compute standardized for high-end node production. So this is a lot of technical jargon, but let me just put it one other way, and then I'll stop talking on this question. Huawei is intending to produce about 1.6 million 7-nanometer AI accelerator units in 2026. That's about 1/8 of the AI accelerator units that NVIDIA produces that are of the Blackwell line, something roughly analogous, although not quite. 1/8 is the target for 2026. I don't think they're going to hit it. I think they're going to struggle to produce enough high bandwidth memory and to package those chips. And even if they could, Chinese AI labs will be starved of the amount of computational power that they need to serve billions of users around the world, and this is precisely the objective of U.S. chip controls. And so it is accurate, I think, Steve, to say your original claim that the competition is shifting. It's shifting away from frontier capabilities into diffusion, and I think the U.S. export controls are having a drastic effect on the shape of the diffusion race between the United States and China.
Well, that was a lot. Yost.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks very much. I think that's super insightful. I would like to challenge to a certain degree the view on expert controls, and to put it into a nutshell. I think if you look into like a 2 or 3 year frame, or be it like 5-year frame, I would definitely say yes, the export controls are successful. Yeah, if you look at Chinese fabs and foundries, we are looking at many of those, and counting the machinery that they buy, delays in the capacity expansion, and so on. And you can say for many, they had delays, yeah, and some even had to shut down and couldn't realize their plans. So I would definitely say yes, it has been successful to a certain degree. However, I think if you look into the long term, like 10 years, 15 years, then I would say it's not just failing, it's even supporting Chinese innovation. I just read a policy paper written by some of those Chinese companies, IMTC, Empyrean, which is also a design company for AI accelerators, and Nora, like an equipment provider. And there was a very interesting sentence in this paper. It was a policy paper intended to the top level, and they make a suggestion. And they said, like, for those segments of the market where we do not have export controls, it's much easier, it's much more difficult to talk to the downstream industry. What do they mean by that? Essentially, that means if Chinese, foundries or like users of this equipment and materials, if they can use foreign technology, they will, even if there are Chinese alternatives, because they are just used and sticking to the ecosystem that is just provided. They will use Japanese photoresist, US EDA, they will use the silicon wafers from abroad, and so on. So that means, and this paper in a way reads a little bit like, okay, please provide us with more export controls. It's a bit overstated, of course, but the point I want to make is export controls over the past 3 to 4 years have created a lot of innovation in China in many areas. And you just said about like smaller models, more efficient models, a mixture of expert approaches, activating less neurons in a way per inference and so on. Huawei, I think, is a very good example because Huawei has become like a nucleus for localization, for like a self-sufficiency. So they want to do everything by themselves, and Huawei is the center of these approaches. And that's why I would say, yes, I think export controls can help you. They buy time, but only over like 3 to 4 years. Mm-hmm. After that, you have to have like another strategy. Otherwise, you're just supporting a big innovation program in China.
Right, or they've completely caught up at that point. So, Sam, over to you, and then Sunny, I think you probably have thoughts too. Let's try to be quick on this, and we can close it out and move to the next one, but please.
I'll be quick. And I don't have a dog in this fight, so whenever I'm listening, I'm always trying to understand the contours of the debate. And I think actually that's my biggest takeaway, is that there actually is not consensus on this question. I think Ryan has captured one very compelling view. And there's also a view that increasingly I think is gaining momentum, which is there is strategic benefit to the United States of having US technology in China and globally. And in fact, those two things are linked. And when we talk about the hardware and the software and the ecosystem that Ryan so captured in such clear terms, thank you, that was really helpful. One of the things that is happening, right, is that it's not just the Huawei Ascend series, the hardware, but it's the software, the NVIDIA CUDA system that goes with it. And AI developers are modeling their architecture based on that. So when Huawei pushes into, say, Saudi Arabia with its stack, that becomes a lock-in that will then have ripple effects for generations of technology built on the Chinese tech stack. Your anecdote about, I hadn't read that policy paper, was so interesting, and it actually is consistent with something that I heard related to not export controls, but the Commerce Department entity list, that apparently there's a really sort of, there's a paradoxical effect, which is that a lot of the Chinese, the aim of the entity list, of course, and the export control regime more broadly is to cut off access for military use. But a lot of the military uses don't rely on the most cutting-edge AI chips. It's more of the consumer, the more high-performant, quick ones. And so I'd been hearing that there was a sort of that companies were vying to be put on the entity list at one point because it meant that they sort of gained prestige within China's domestic ecosystem. And they already had their own, particularly in the military, the defense side, their own indigenous supply chains, because that was the better fit for what they needed. I will also say that, if we look at Huawei's revenue, it has increased. I think it's 60% year on if we go back to some of the actions that were taken against it. So there's a truly, and I remember watching a decade plus ago, actually I think we can go back 20 years to when these state funds for semiconductors were first announced, both at the central and the local level, billions of dollars thrown at developing advanced chip capacity in China. And to the point made in the opening briefing, a lot of this went to like motorcycle and real estate parks in the provinces. It wasn't actually being used in any strategic way. It was wasted. But the U.S. then, that was a kickstart moment that after decades of throwing state support at something, finally was the aha moment. And now you have an entire domestic chain from the design, the infrastructure, that's aligned saying, okay, buy domestic. I will say though, China's also not monolithic on this. So one of the questions is, if China even gets access to the more powerful compute, will they take it? Because they've seen the benefits that come to their own domestic industry of having to buy local. And so I think we're also seeing a differentiated approach, if these are even going to be available in China, where maybe the state-owned enterprises will be forced to procure local, but the AI labs, the more consumer-facing that need it in the shorter term, would take the more advanced US options if they had it. This is all to say, I think it's an open question, and it's important to continue to listen to the evidence on it.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Sunny, I'm going to tee up our next topic, and it's going to you. So there may be some things that you wanted to say in this conversation that you can work into the next theme on deployment and system integration, and claim number 4 that the stack matters more for China than any single layer. And I think, Sam, you set that up really well. So can you kind of share any other thoughts you have on kind of this compute chips and constraints topic, but then also, where is AI actually being embedded at scale within China, and why? And is deployment China's real comparative advantage? And we'll take just about 5 or so minutes on this topic before we move into some suggestions for the future.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I appreciate the debate on the export control. I agree. That can be another, topic that we will have an hour-long conversation regarding the effectiveness of export control. But back to the, AI deployment in China. I think the AI stack right now in China is absolutely very unique, because we have seen evidence how Chinese have been pushing AI to build their own digital infrastructure. They put AI into their financial sector. Actually, we have seen the Chinese talk about fintech quite a lot, right? Using AI, the crossover with fintech. We haven't seen that many time yet right now by the USG. Of course, the private sector right now, of course, in the States, both in Silicon Valley and New York, people who know about fintech will care about fintech. But in terms of the grand strategy, I think the Chinese absolutely trying to use AI more in the financial sector, trying to synchronize and try to foster a better ecosystem and try to provide a better next generation financial services. At the same time, the healthcare industry, we have seen how the Chinese government have been using AI for their healthcare, especially in their hospital. Because China has like a 1.4 billion population. They have a lot of patients, they have a lot of data. And then how do you use AI to improve the healthcare system is also another huge rising domain right now in terms of the application scenario for China. And last but not least is also about biotech. A lot of Washington policymakers right now, they also talk about biotech more and more incrementally. But at the same time, if you have seen the progress that the Chinese has made in biotech with AI, I think it's impressive, and it can be quite horrifying, depends on how you consider China. If you consider China as a competitor or even a rivalry, then actually the progress they have made in the bio domain and the pharmaceutical domain is actually horrifying, because they are using AI to manufacture more and more next generation medicine. They use AI in agriculture. They want to build more climate resilient crops and also a different kind of products. And you have seen so many creative and successful examples right now about how the Chinese using AI at the local level, at the central level. So you have seen this absolutely a whole of nation initiative. So this kind of AI plus initiative, as mentioned before, I think is the key that we have to study more and try to see what lesson we can learn from that, especially for the US and also for the Western government.
Okay, so real quick, Yas, do you have anything else you want to add to this particular segment? And then we'll move into our kind of forward-looking.
You mean to diffusion?
Yeah, this question of diffusion. I was hearing Sunny talking about things like their creative use. We started with a comment that you had offered on on embodied AI. That's certainly a place we would like to go in future conversations for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the thing that I had in mind, I mean, we have this framing of the Chinese elite as like an engineering elite. And I think if we think of the Chinese economy and society as a machine that is continuously improved, yeah, and that is how I think they approached it for the past 30, 40 years, step by step improving of the whole like economy and society. AI is just another step, and a very powerful step. But it is thought from the view of efficiency. How can we make our society and our economy better? Yeah, so I think definitely it's not a pure technological perspective. It's a question of this machinery, how to improve that. That is the top level perspective, and there also AI Plus comes in. By the way, nice history tour 2015, I think we had the Internet Plus. It's the same logic, yeah. So AI connects to like everything. It's to law, to like health, and so on. And they are pushing these kind of applications across sectors. And I think the Chinese government they are very helpful in doing that. So they are very supportive of this. But in the end, actual happening that is within the society, that is like the people using it, that's the startups and so on. That is happening, maybe not despite the government support, but it's happening without government support, in my view. Yeah.
Okay. So let's close it out. This will be a very quick lightning round where I was hoping to hear from each of our panelists for an idea or recommendation that they would offer for improving United States posture to lead in AI over the next decade. Or alternatively, you could take a different angle for maintaining strategic stability between the United States and China in light of AI's dual-use nature and transformative potential. So I'm hoping for some nuggets of good ideas we can chase towards in the future. Ryan, we'll just go in order here. Ryan, do you want to start us off?
Sure. And I'll again try to keep it kind of quick, but regardless of whether you agree with me about export control or not, I think the trade was to restrict compute in the 2020s, to alter the Chinese AI ecosystem in the 2020s and 2030s at the software level, understanding that hardware would eventually be lost. Regardless of where you come down, I think the key recommendation is to pay attention to the iron laws of physics that govern how this technology will be deployed and where. Maybe it's in a large data center that's located in the United States or China. Maybe it's at the edge in somebody's personal phone or hand. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. There are a handful of companies in the world that produce the components to build compute, to turn electricity into tokens. And it's worth knowing exactly who they are, what components they make, and where the bottlenecks actually exist. Whether that's high bandwidth memory, whether it's logic die fabrication, number one. It's also, I think, worth paying extremely close attention to the industries where China is catching up. Sometimes that is traditional GPU fabrication. Sometimes it's older technologies that allow China to do more with less. Silicon photonic interconnects that allow them to link clusters of weaker chips by sending data between chips using light. Other emerging industries where it's really worth understanding what breakthroughs are being achieved and at what industrial scale to serve AI's billions of users that exist in 2026 that did not exist in 2025 and 2024.
Thanks, Ryan. Samm?
We need to forget China. When we want to talk about how we can be the best, let's forget China. Why are we running forward, looking over our shoulder at someone nipping at our heels? I love talking about China. I think it's fascinating intellectually. But if we want to truly go forward and lead in this, this has nothing to do with China. This has to do with being confident in the power of the U.S. innovative system, the openness, our ability to compete. Let's take China out of the equation and move forward with confidence.
Thank you, Samm. Sunny?
That's great. Since I'm a great student of the net assessment at Tsai, and then from the net assessment, I've learned that, actually we do, at the same time, we have to understand our competitor, in order to pursue a better policy right now. So I would say I understand that, we shouldn't comment or care so much about China, but at the same time, as a matter of fact, I think Washington policymakers, they really lack key understanding of China. So I would highly recommend that as Ryan has mentioned, there are a lot of things happening right now in China, the silicon photonic, quantum, advanced packaging, all kind of stuff. I think this is something that DC policymakers find them in a very difficult position to understand. So we cannot be like that. So we should catch up in terms of understanding, in terms of our know-how and expertise. I think this is the best way for the US to win the next generation competition.
Thanks, Sonny. Yost, the final word.
Yeah, do you want me to give recommendations for the US government or Europeans? Or
Well, actually, I'd be very interested in your we obviously did not have this in the frame of the EU, but wherever you want to take it, frankly.
I mean, fairly general. I think, first of all, don't lose the long-term competition perspective. Yeah, so think also like where will China stand in the next 10, 20 years with what we are doing now, and can we avoid it, or what's the best way also to stay competitive? 20 seconds, I think one...
you could take a few more than 20.
Yeah, I think one really area that we briefly touched upon, but I think that is very important to see like how China will expand globally in AI. It's at the moment, I mean, I don't know if any one of you uses Chinese models, but I think throughout the world, I think the usage is much smaller than for US models. I'm a frequent user of Kimi because I like it, but I'm also like a China researcher. But I think the question is, will China become more competitive when it comes to like other countries globally? Yeah? We had the example of Saudi Arabia, and I think it's just one part of it. And I think that is really one part of the competition that you should, I think some people are also focusing on, which is quite, will decide also a little bit how this competition will, in the end look like.
Okay, yep. Well, thank you, Yost. So let me do a quick check-in. Jen, can you help me to understand, do we have time for a few audience questions? Are we out? I know our clock is out, but I don't know what time it is. Okay, so let's try to get 3 in, and let's start over here, and just be loud. That's a great question. And well, this is a free ball. It's a jump ball. Ryan, do you want to take it?
I wrote like a 3,000-word essay last night on this question, and it's out on my Substack, Choosing Victory. But short answer is yes. Next week, President Trump and President Xi are going to meet in Beijing. Reportedly, according to the Wall Street Journal, as of yesterday, AI is going to be on the agenda. I think the best case scenario, the thing the United States should ask for, if it's not asking already, is to ensure that China's AI model releases are coordinated appropriately with enough lead time with its cybersecurity institutions to verify that they can't be jailbroken, that would-be cyber terrorists and bioterrorists are not going to use DeepSeek v4 or better models to jailbreak them and then uplift their capabilities. And so I think the United States is going to be worried about it, it should be worried about it, and so should China. So the two should talk about it.
I'll add my own answer, which is what I was in Beijing and Shanghai talking about, is I think that there's a basis for cooperation around loss of control. It's something that escapes the geopolitical frame, and it's something that there may be common cause on. But we'll see. Let's do another question.
great point, and I would love to hear Sam's answer on this too, because I know that Sam's been looking at this for a very long time. And my perspective, the short answer is yes. China has countermeasures. China is not the only game in town, and neither is the United States. And so the calculation with the chip controls originally was very much the concept that this is a silver bullet. I mean, China's pouring $140 billion into an integrated circuit industry fund. They're determined to make progress in the technology. At the same time, industry doesn't want to use Huawei. If we ban American technology, they will. Do we want to force that calculation? The answer at the time was yes, because China can't make enough compute. That's still true. And in fact, it's starting to bite in 2026. But they're catching up. They're starting to use Huawei. DeepSeek V4, although it was originally trained on stockpiled NVIDIA chips, ultimately was retrained using Huawei earlier this year. And that's an impressive feat. It's one that I won't deny you. But I also think that basically, each side has countermeasures. We could pick any number of supply chains to weaponize against one another. In AI's development, compute is the key that the United States, Taiwan, and South Korea hold unique custody over.
Sam, any add-ons?
I just think we massively underestimated the weapon that China has with the rare earths chokehold. I haven't seen a good solution to it yet.
Okay.
Export controls are not, are not a US invention in that regard. China has been using the rare earth controls back in 2010. And just to keep in mind, they have been, we were like wondering, why are they not using it for so many years? They could have. They waited for this one very moment when the US came in with this 140% tariffs and so on. So I think they are very strategic in that regard.
Okay. I saw two hands, so we're going to limit to you, young lady, and then Lindley, I think maybe you had one as well. Did your hand go up? Well, let's see if we have time. We'll start here, and then we'll go there.
Thank you so much for that question, because I think...
Can you restate the question just in case others didn't hear it?
Well, I'll just say that I really appreciate your question because it gives me an opportunity to clarify what I said, because I actually fundamentally agree with Sunny's point, and I think it's both of these things, and how do you do that at once? I think we need to not be obsessed about leading via keeping China down, because it means we're starting from a place of weakness and insecurity, and we need to lead from a place of strength and confidence. And I think that Sunny is 100% right. We have to understand what's happening in China, because there are really important innovations, developments, and also we can learn the good and the bad from what's happening in China. China's also a regulatory petri dish for us. They're experimenting with how to regulate. We haven't talked about that on this panel yet, but in terms of their regulatory regime that they're building out for AI and data, there's good and bad there that I think is almost like a petri dish. We have an opportunity to see someone's experimenting with how do you put guardrails on this within an authoritarian political context. But let's pay attention to developments there. So thanks very much for the follow-up question.
Okay. I think we are out of time as the room is signaling. There's other places to go. I'd like to please help me thank our panelists. This was a fantastic conversation.